At Method Learning, our college prep experts are here to guide your student every step of the way. From boosting ACT SAT scores with proven test prep strategies to navigating the complex world of college admissions and to maximizing financial aid and scholarships, we provide the expertise your family needs for success. Join us as we talk to our Method Learning experts to provide you the insights into how your student can excel through the college process.
All right. Well, thank you. Today, we are excited to be bringing another test prep expert with us. Today, I have Tom Ehlers, who is the founder of Method Learning, to really dive into how he can help students really go through the college prep process. So thank you, Tom, for coming, and excited to ask you some of these questions. So let's kind of dive in. Tell me a little bit of background. How did you get started, and what really inspired you to really dive into ACT, SAT help?
Yeah, my parents spent their whole careers as teachers. And so I had gone to Princeton. I had done the teacher preparation program there. And I was actually teaching fifth grade back home on Long Island where I grew up. And my dad said to me, Tom, you did well in the SAT, ACT. Maybe you could help some of the students at our high school. And actually specifically some of the student athletes. And when I started tutoring for the SAT and ACT, I just saw that these students were scoring so far below their potential. They really had no strategies, no idea how to approach tests at all. In many cases, they did not even know what they were being tested on. Mm-hmm. So literally after the first hour, I fell in love with it because the student was saying, thank you so much. That was so helpful. The parent was saying, thank you so much. And then the student scores were increasing significantly. And that appealed to me as well, that it was very objective. It was very clear if I helped the person or not. It was like a simple scorecard. I also love the fact that I was teaching fundamental math and grammar and reading that education's always been my passion and I've always loved learning. And I was like, this is stuff that people need to know. Yes, we're going to help you score higher on the SAT or ACT, but you need to know this stuff for the rest of your life. And the SAT and ACT was almost forcing students to work hard at something that they really should have worked hard at years ago, but it was forcing them to work hard at these skills, that they needed. And so for all of those reasons, and the last thing I should share is, again, teaching fifth grade during the day. And I mean, the fifth graders are just trying to drive me nuts and really good at it. And I felt like I wasn't doing a lot of teaching. I was just, classroom management. And then after school, it's just pure teaching, 60 minutes with one student, that student would leave, or I'd drive to the next student's house, 60 more minutes of pure teaching. So for all of those reasons, I just fell in love with helping students prepare for the SAT and ACT.
That's awesome. And so you've been doing this a long time. So when did that start, and how long have you been in this business?
Yeah, so I started in 1998, the year I graduated college, so 26 years. And it's funny. People say, gosh, how can you do this? Is it so monotonous? But two things, right? One is I loved becoming an expert at the questions, right? No matter what question a student asked me, and there could be 1,000 different practice questions, I had done every one of those 1,000 questions. I mean, it became a joke, right? It was like a party trick. People could just flip to a page and I knew the question. So it really appealed to me to be such an expert on the material. And so I liked doing the same thing over and over again because you kind of hone your craft. And then the second thing, of course, is the students are also different. So it really wasn't monotonous because every hour I was with a different student. There was that really human connection. And of course, we've all lived through this pandemic. There's just something so neat about that bond, right? Of that one-to-one teacher and student bond. And again, the kids were so different. So it was I enjoyed the time with each of them. It really wasn't monotonous.
And I think that's what's really impactful, especially I know we have all different types of test prep, but really that one-on-one is where I think you've always seen students thrive quite a bit, right?
I will say that I got to the point where I was then I really liked teaching classes because I liked, it was just exhilarating, right? To be impacting so many students at the same time. I also love the fact that I love that when you can help every student work at their own pace. And of course we can do that with our methodized platform, but like, I just love, like, sometimes I'll actually go to a school and like somebody from the school will come into the room where I'm with a group of kids, and like every kid, it's like, you could hear a pin drop in the room, and each student is just working at their own pace. And like, that's exhilarating to me too, that, then you're helping so many kids all at one time.
Yeah, to have so many different options and with their learning styles. So what would you say is like one of the most common mistakes that you see during either the test prep process that students are kind of making that maybe don't set them up for success?
Great question. And I mean, there are a lot of things.
There's a lot, yeah.
The first thing that came to mind, and something I'm just so passionate about, is I get very frustrated, sad that so many kids don't feel like it's going to make a difference. Like they think like I'm just a bad test taker, or, that this is an IQ test. And I'm like, listen, these are not IQ tests. They're very redundant and repetitive. It's the same stuff over and over again. And so I like hit them over the head with this stat that every question you get right is 10 more points on your score. So if you just think of it as, if I just get 5 more math questions correct, 5 more grammar questions, and 5 more reading questions, that's a 150-point improvement. And I find that when you share that with students in that way, you see their attitude start to change. And I think it's because deep down inside, they're like, I can actually do that. Like I can get 5, 5, and 5. And for me, again, I'm almost dating myself, but like even going back to 1998, like students had no idea what their score meant. Right. Like, so it was like the proverbial black box. And so sharing with them, like, here's what your score means. And if you just get 5, 5, and 5, you're going to be 150 points higher. And so that is a common misconception, that there's not a lot you can do about these tests. And, I guess one other just kind of related one, Amanda, is I guess so many families are, my son or daughter does great in school, but they don't do well on big tests, or they haven't done well in the SAT. And I say, hold on a second. How much time does your son or daughter put in to their academic coursework? And they're like, oh my God, like a tremendous amount. Like they're up till midnight every night doing homework, like 5 hours a night. And I'm like, and how much time do they put into studying for the SAT? And they're like, oh, we bought a book and like they studied for 30 minutes. I'm like, well, then there's no mystery here. They're doing well in school because they're working in very, very hard. They really didn't put any time into the SAT. So in fact, it actually makes a lot of sense that the two are not, commensurate. So those are a couple of the like misconceptions as far as attitudes that I hear a lot.
So what would you say then would be like your number one tip on how a student can increase their scores? You kind of mentioned some already, right? Is really staying focused and studying for the test, and also really just trying to get some of that information down. But what would you say is the best way to get those scores increased?
Yeah, it's another great question. And what I say to students is, don't focus on the number, the score that you got on the practice test. Like, what's interesting, right? You take a practice exam, and I'm just going to use a number for argument's sake. Let's say a student gets a 1200 on that practice exam, and maybe they were disappointed because they've heard at the school they're interested in, you really need to be around a 1350. What I say to them is, this is not, it's not a reason to be disappointed. What it is let's look at the ones you got wrong. Some of the ones you got wrong are ridiculously hard questions. And yes, you could learn to do them, but it would take a really long time to get good at those. But some of the questions you got wrong, you only got them wrong by a little bit. And if we just go over this one little strategy, technique, tip, you're going to easily get that question right next time. And so I think, like you say, like, what's one tip? The tip is to approach it like, it's not to get it right or wrong. It's, what did you do wrong? What's the underlying strategy or technique? And then know that you're going to use that strategy or technique on many, many other questions. And so it's what I find a little interesting or a little frustrating is humans. If you said like, hey, train for a marathon for 2 months, every human understands that if you trained appropriately, your time would go down, right? Nobody's surprised by that. But then it's like, well, it's the same with the SAT. If you train for 2 months on like the things you got wrong, 2 months from now, your score will be much higher. And if you're not happy with that score, then you just need to put another month or two. So it doesn't, I hope that answers your question.
Yeah.
The tip is focus on the ones you got wrong and just say to yourself, how did I mess this up? What was the trick or what was the concept? And then, hey, I'm going to see one just like it.
No, that's a fantastic trip. And I always use like running and marathons as in college admissions a lot, because it's a different type of race, right? And you really do have to train and practice and think about it and plan for it. So I think that was a fantastic way to say it. So when a student comes in to method learning, or either working with you or someone else, like how do you approach or change how you teach them based on their learning style? So some are strong readers, some are strong math takers. Like how does somebody work with different types of learning techniques?
Yeah, great question. I mean, a couple of things you just brought up. So one is it has to be personalized to the student in the sense of there are tons of students we work with where it's really appropriate to spend 75% of the time on the reading and writing questions, because that's where they're going to see a much larger increase. And so we have to be realistic that number one, there's a limiting factor as far as money, right? Like tutoring can be expensive, and we have different price points and things like that, but tutoring can be expensive. So a family is going to have a certain amount that they want to invest in tutoring, but actually even more important than that is the limiting factor is time. And so we don't want students doing 50, 60 hours of tutoring, even if money wasn't an object. Like we want students working on the other things and spending their time in other ways. So how can we be very efficient with, let's say, 12 hours of tutoring? Well, some students, it makes sense to spend 75% of the time on the reading and writing, and then other students, 75% on the math. And then you also ask about different learning styles. And there's a whole like conversation about like learning styles and stuff, but every great teacher knows that you adapt your teaching to the students. And so you have some students who are very quiet and shy, and you really have to force them to explain their thinking and their reasoning, right? Because actually, I'll say that when I first started tutoring, I felt like the more talking I did in the hour, the more value the parent was getting. And then as I got more experience, I realized the less talking I did, the more value, right? You have to let the student talk, and then you can hear their misconception, or they actually sometimes figure out their own misconception. Now, the flip side to that is sometimes you have a very talkative student, right? A very social student, a very, and those students, it's almost like then me talking is a good thing, because I'm focusing them and I'm not letting them get distracted, right? So again, it's a lot of times it's more of like a personality type of thing as far as how you have to adjust your teaching.
No, I think that's fantastic. And I think that it's so critical, right? Is because we got to meet the students where the students are at to get them to their end goals, right? So I got one more question. So can you share a really memorable story or experience that you had with a student where they really achieved what they were looking for and how they did that?
Yeah, well, sure. One thing that comes off the top of my head, and again, my parents spent their whole careers as gym teachers. And so I worked with a ton of athletes. We've worked with a ton of athletes throughout this whole 26 years, but in the beginning, it was mostly athletes. And what was very memorable for me was a lot of these student athletes were very, very confident on the athletic field or court, right, what have you. But they really lacked confidence academically. Like they never felt like they accomplished something meaningful academically. And rather than cite like one student, because it's been a lot of students now over 26 years, there were just so many times where a student, when they got their score back and they increased their score 200 points, 300 points, it doesn't even matter, because I don't want to sound gaudy. It's like their starting number was so low because they really didn't know what they were doing. So they would increase tremendously. And you could just tell it was one of the first times in their life that they felt like I worked hard academically and I have something to show for it. And it was something that they felt really good about. Like I busted my butt and it paid off. And also like the student was like, I can be successful academically. I think that, like, unfortunately, they just always struggled in school, and they always felt like this school was something they weren't good at. And to me, it was because, look, it's tough to be a classroom teacher. It always has been, right? So many kids in the class, you can't sometimes give that one student the attention that they deserve. Or unfortunately, that student, because they're in a large group, they're not going to make a connection with the teacher. But then when you're one-on-one with them, or even like 3-on-1, 4-on-1, you can connect with that student, and then you can get more out of them. So, sorry, that was a long-winded answer.
It's all right. No, I completely understand. It's just when different success for each student, success is different, right? And it's measured differently. And so having them have some ownership and feeling like they achieved it is fantastic. Because like you said, I think a lot of students come into this thinking, I'm not a good test taker, I'm not going to do very well. And they have that sort of negative self-talk going in their head. So when you're able to overcome that and they see success on the other side, that's really powerful, and like you said, it's the same skills they're going to need their freshman year of college. They need these math skills. They need these reading and writing skills. Like, it's not just for the test taking, for its sake. It's for why the tests are around anyways, right?
Yeah. And it is a shame. And I know we're going to wrap up, but it is a shame that because in many places there's been this sort of opting out of tests. And I now have talked to a lot of families where they regret opting their students out of tests for so many years, because students really don't know how to approach, an assessment. And in life, like, at some point you're going to have assessments, whether it's in college or whether it's for some type of certification you need for a career. Like, you're going to have to face down a challenging assessment. And so kids need some of that experience so they can, build step by step. So.
Yeah. And, on the college admission side, which we'll have a lot of college advisors on talking about some of these same questions too, we're just seeing such an ebb and flow of testing and what's going on. And we're just seeing so many schools coming back to it because of exactly that. Like, these are critical skills that they need to be successful at their universities. So, well, Tom, thank you so much for being our first person on here and sharing your insights. And thank you. And if you want to get a hold of Tom, email is tom@methodlearning.com. He is always available and loves to chit chat with all of our families. So definitely reach out if you have any questions. But thank you again, Tom, and everybody have a great day. Thank you.
Thanks, Amanda.